It's Wednesday here on the North Shore Drive podcast, but it's a different kind of Wednesday because tomorrow the Steelers play the Browns in Cleveland. We'll get you ready for that by talking about some of the biggest angles of the game, including how will the Steelers improve in the red zone with Russell Wilson? What about one of the key Browns who are back in this game and Nick Chubb after being injured against the Steelers last year? And whether or not this is really a trap game for Pittsburgh as they take on a 2-8 Browns team in the AFC North. All here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello, welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Today's episode is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Whether you're injured in a car accident or hurt on the job, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims for over 40 years recover more than $2 billion on their behalf. If you or a loved one have been seriously injured in an accident, call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers' red zone offense because right now it is one of the worst in the NFL. Of course, the Steelers had 4 red zone possessions against the Ravens on Sunday. None of them resulted in touchdowns. They ended up getting 6 field goals in the game, and they've had different woes. And you go back to even last week, 2 weeks ago now, against the Commanders. Jaylen Warren fumbling in the red zone, just missed opportunities. You go back to, I think it was the Giants game where, Russell Wilson, had Van Jefferson, and Van Jefferson stopped at the wrong spot, and just the miscues that they've had there. What do you see? We talked to Russell Wilson on Tuesday in the Steelers locker room. What do you see as the biggest thing that's in the way for the Steelers right now from just taking a decent step forward in red zone scoring?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things, and I think unfortunately for the Steelers, it doesn't matter if Justin Fields is the quarterback or Russell Wilson is. I wrote about this yesterday. It's kind of been feast or famine with Wilson. He had a really good game in the red zone against the Jets, really good against the Commanders, 3 for 4. But they had offers against both the Giants and the Ravens. And when you look at their touchdown percentage in the red zone over the course of the season, 44%. It's amazing that they are 8-2 with that kind of percentage. Only 2 teams are worse. So, Chris, it's everything. You got to run the ball better. The passing game, the protection has to be better. If you just look at what happened, against the Ravens, and Arthur Smith talked about this yesterday, they have to do better when they're in goal-to-go situations like 1st and 10 at the 10. They can't be getting tackled behind the line of scrimmage or get a 1 or 2 yard gain. They got to be getting closer to the end zone, and they just haven't done that consistently enough all season.
They haven't. Right now, they rank 30th in the NFL in touchdown percentage in the red zone at 44.44%. That's just ahead of the Cowboys and the Giants and behind the Patriots and the Titans there. And that's for an offense that, by all means, is a lot better than it has been in quite some time. You look at what the Steelers offense has been able to do before this last game. They were averaging 30 points a game with Russell Wilson at quarterback. And of course that took a hit, with last week with scoring just 18 points. But even with that, they're still right in the middle of the pack of the NFL, a little bit outside the top 10. They're averaging 23.3 points per game. That's 0.2 points behind the Texans. 0.5 points behind the Cardinals. Both of those teams are playoff teams right now, and decent ones at that. And they have they're the quarterbacks that they both think are their tickets to the future. So and they're also 0.5. They're also just not too far behind the Chiefs themselves. So I look at this and I think that it's not the death knell to the Steelers offense just yet, but they've been able to survive these problems because of different reasons. They were able to outplay the Giants. They were able to outlast the Ravens and outplay them as well. But there's going to be games where, they face the Chiefs, they face the Eagles, they face the Ravens again. There's going to be games, and maybe even this week against the Browns, where they got to turn the 3 points into 7 points more often, because the mistakes will happen on defense and other teams will make more plays. And that can be the difference between, maybe getting a 1 seed, maybe winning a playoff game this season.
Yeah. I mean, how many times can you go to the well with Chris Boswell and have him account for all of your offense? I mean, it happened in the opener in Atlanta, and then it happened again, against the Ravens. And if not for Chris Boswell and a defense that played tremendous in both of those games, those are 2 games that get away. So, Russell Wilson said on Tuesday, just you got to keep after it, right? You got to keep taking your shots down there, keep repping it, and eventually it'll get better. And, Arthur Smith said the same thing. That's why you keep working at it. I think it was 2019, Chris, the year the Titans went to the AFC Championship game when Smith was their OC. They didn't start out really well in the red zone, but eventually they got going. Derrick Henry became more of a factor as that season went on. I think maybe the simple answer for the Steelers is the running game has to be better down there. But as you know, as every football fan knows, once you get closer to the goal line, it becomes harder and harder to run the football. So eventually they're going to have to get creative and come up with some stuff. But, in a nutshell, I think the simple answer is Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, that offensive line, they got to start getting more push down there.
I agree with that too, because they're not absolved here, because you want to be able to control the line of scrimmage. That's why they're drafting guys for the offensive line pretty consistently. That's why they went and got Zach Frazier, Broderick Jones, and Troy Fautanu in the first 2 rounds the last 2 years. You don't have Troy Fautanu, but you got Zach Frazier. You Mason McCormick is stepping up. I think that there's some stuff there. If Jaylen Warren doesn't fumble at the 1 against the Commanders, are we talking about this as much, because they probably get that score and then maybe another score at the end of the game the way they did. I look at this and I think part of it, and as Arthur Smith kind of talked about, not setting yourself behind, not making key mistakes, not missing key blocks, that's going to be a factor there. And that's part of why I think that the Steelers offensive line can become more consistent, because there's plays where they run block their butts off. There's plays where Mason McCormick is 10 yards downfield and killing people. There's plays Broderick Jones is just mauling his side in and kind of creating a whole sideline for Najee Harris to run up. There's plays where Zach Frazier is just dominating, but there's also plays where it's kind of popcorny, where it's like, hey, one guy's doing great, the other, there's like 2 other guys over here though that are missing their assignments, and that's blowing up the run play, and it's happening in the red zone because, like you said, it's a shorter space to defend, so teams can be a little bit more aggressive. And that's something the Steelers, I think, have to account for if they want to be a better red zone offense. It's not just on, the quarterback, it's also on the O-line and the run game to figure it out too.
Yeah, if you just want to take a peek into Arthur Smith's mindset, and I think by extension Mike Tomlin's mindset down there, because, Mike talked about it as well before Arthur did. He was getting drilled yesterday with questions about the red zone, their ineffectiveness down there. But one of his answers, he kind of gave an impression of where the Steelers are right now. He said, the thing I'm most concerned about is the turnovers. And he mentioned Jaylen Warren fumble on the 1, and, of course, Russell Wilson's interception down there against the Ravens. So we all know that this is a team that is built on the defense, and sometimes you have to make smart plays. And Russell Wilson didn't have to throw a touchdown there. An 8-point lead against the Ravens midway through the fourth quarter would have been golden. That's what they wanted. So sometimes it's just about being smart, taking care of the football too. And sometimes, field goals are better than taking chances of throwing the ball into the end zone.
Agreed. I think that there's it's about taking your shots. I mean, and Mike Tomlin made it clear when we said, could Darnell Washington have jumped a little bit for that ball? He was like, nah, that ball needs to not be thrown. Because again, you're looking to protect there. You're not trying to go up. You're not trying to flip a game. You're trying to hold on to a lead and trust your defense that has been dominant in this game. And so decision making is part of it. Accuracy is part of it. physicality and accountability across the offensive line is part of it. All of it needs to show up, and especially against a Browns team that is desperate for a win and to play spoiler to the Steelers' strong start to the season. We'll talk about those Browns in a second here, especially with the return of Nick Chubb. If you remember, before this season, when he came back just about a month ago against the Bengals, he had missed the entire season and most of last season because in the second game of the season last year, the Steelers took him out. Minka Fitzpatrick had a low hit on him that almost ended his career. Where's Nick Chubb? How does he play into this rivalry? What do the Steelers do to stop him and that Browns offense? We talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. If you're injured in an accident, you're probably wondering what's next. Well, for over 40 years, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped injury victims answer that very question. Whether it's gathering evidence, collecting medical records, or dealing with the insurance companies, Edgar Snyder Associates has helped over 75,000 people handle the what's next question. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit www.edgarsnyder.com for a free consultation. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, you got a story coming out on Nick Chubb here. It's a bit of an interesting matchup with the Steelers and the Browns with Nick Chubb and how things played out. There's a lot of drama behind it. A lot of Browns fans, alleged that Minka Fitzpatrick's hit on him was dirty. Chubb acknowledged it wasn't. The Browns acknowledged it wasn't. The Steelers were like, "What are you talking about? That's Nick Chubb. You got to go. You got to go in hard against him." And I think everyone's kind of past that now. But now Nick Chubb is back and he's played 4 games with the Browns. Where do you see him factoring into this game, considering Jameis Winston's the quarterback, and this is a Browns team that when they were at their best last year, they ran the ball well.
Yeah, I mean, since he's come back, he's been the guy who's received most of their carries. But unfortunately for the Browns, he's not where he was pre-injury. I think in 4 games, he has 163 yards.
Mm-hmm.
I will say he had his best game last week or last Sunday against the Saints. He carried 11 times for 50 yards. Now, they got behind late in that game. He wasn't a factor in the fourth quarter, so they had to throw the ball a bunch. But maybe he is rounding back into form. But, Chris, that's his second major knee injury. When he was at Georgia, he had a similar injury that involved, I think, all 3 ligaments. This was a gruesome injury as well. So it's hard for running backs to come back from these types of injuries. But, the Steelers know Chubb. The Nick Chubb from 2022. I think the Steelers are catching the Browns at a time where the running game, unfortunately for them, isn't as big a part of the offense as it has been in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, that running game has given the Steelers fits some years. You go back to some of their previous matchups when they lost to the Browns and Mitch Trubisky started against the Browns back in 2022. Nick Chubb went off for them in that game. Of course, he couldn't go off in the game they beat the Steelers last year because he was hurt. But that's an easy way to balance things when your passing game isn't working. And like you said, Nick Chubb still got to warm back up into things and see how things are going. The Browns' offensive line also has taken quite a few injuries. But like right now, the Browns are the 4th worst rushing offense in the NFL. They're averaging 88.5 yards per game on the ground. That's just ahead of the Jets, Cowboys, and the Raiders. It doesn't mean that they're going to not exist on the ground. Like we said, Nick Chubb could bounce back. He could figure out some things. This is also a divisional game. It will get to the impact of it being a divisional game when we talk about this, whether this is a trap game or not. But I look at this and I think the Steelers benefit from, they know what it's like to play Nick Chubb. They know what it's like. Even new guys like Patrick Queen know what it's like to play Nick Chubb because he's been in the division. And I think that's going to be a big factor in this game because you want to get to where Jameis Winston can be aggressive and make some mistakes and throw some of the interceptions that he normally does in his career. because if you could do that, you can get takeaways and set the pace with the Browns. But if you allow Nick Chubb to get going, it puts Jameis Winston in a place where, like Dorian Thompson-Robinson last year, and whereas it was the run game is more so just because the Steelers had no offense in that game. But like Dorian Thompson-Robinson last year when they beat the Steelers, all he had to do was just do some check downs and some quick passes here and there. He didn't have to get aggressive because they were never in a position where they had to. You got to make this Browns team have to step out of their shoes, and a big part of that involves stopping and never letting get go Nick Chubb.
Yeah, you look when the Browns have been, decent in the recent past. 2022, they were 6th in the NFL in rushing. Even last year, after Chubb got injured, this was a playoff team. They were 12th in the league in rushing. So you mentioned that the offensive line, isn't as good as it has been in years past. They're dealing with some injuries too. Everyone is this time of year. They just haven't been able to overcome those. And the result is they've had to throw the ball a lot with Jameis Winston. I mean, they fell behind in that game against the Saints, Chris. He threw for 395 yards. Now, that's a prolific number, but it also tells you you're in catch-up mode and you're having to throw the ball a lot in the fourth quarter. So I'm with you. This game is still all about stopping the run, make them one-dimensional, and then put some pressure on Jameis Winston and force him into some turnovers. And as we all know, throughout the course of his career, he's been a guy who can certainly turn the ball over.
He certainly has been. If you go to Pro Football Focus, and they have what's called turnover-worthy plays, where basically, did the quarterback make a mistake that should have led to a turnover or reasonably could have led to a turnover? In the last 4 weeks, he is 2nd in the NFL with turnover-worthy plays, with 7 such plays. And the crazy thing is, the only person ahead of him in the NFL right now is Drake May during that span, and Jameis Winston had a bye week. During this, Drake May had 4 games to account for there. So Jameis Winston is going to give you your shots. When we talked to Cam Hayward yesterday in the locker room, he called him a gunslinger. That's absolutely who he is. And listen, Jameis Winston has a cannon of an arm still. He can still make plays, but you got to be ready for when he's going to take those aggressive shots, because he's most likely when he's doing that, he's giving you a chance to make a play on the ball as well. And if the Steelers can be opportunistic in this game, that can take over the entire game and set the tone. But again, if the Browns can run the ball, they might be able to say, "Hey, Jameis, just hold on to that football. Don't do anything crazy. We might be able to win this with our ground game and our defense."
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, also, Chris, they're a 2-8 football team. When you have a gunslinger like that, and what the heck attitude, we're not going to the playoffs. Funny things can happen sometimes, and I think the Steelers have to be on guard for that as well. They still have some weapons over there. Hasn't been a great season, but Winston has been around for almost a decade now. He knows how to engineer yards in the passing game, so they're going to have to be aware of that as well.
They will have to be aware of that. They will have to be prepared. And I want to talk about how prepared they seem. Just we're in the locker room. We're talking to the players. We're talking to the coaches. It's a short week after a rivalry game, and you're facing a 2-win team. And I think there's some Steelers fans being like, "Wait a second, I remember facing 2-win teams last year. That didn't go too great for the Steelers." We'll talk about whether or not this is a trap game for the Steelers and what they're doing to counter that. All next on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, we'll remind you this show is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They are mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can go to 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, Pennsylvania to get your new Honda vehicle today, or visit their website, moonhonda.com, where you can see the full assortment of vehicles available to you. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
To build the Honda CR-V Hybrid, we took everything you love about the CR-V and kicked it up a notch with greater power for a CR-V unlike any before. Adventure confidently with Honda, Car and Driver's most awarded brand in 10 Best history. The CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, part of the Honda line of rugged vehicles. Visit your local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily. Buy online or reserve from select Honda dealers.
We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, there's talk around the city about this being a trap game. This is a classic Mike Tomlin game. This is where the Steelers always falter against bad teams, and all that nonsense. I've pointed this out elsewhere that Mike Tomlin's record against losing teams is not some terrible thing to fear. If you actually look at his career, it's close. It's pretty much like 75% of those games he wins. Compare that to like Kyle Shanahan, who wins like 66% of those games. So it's not like the Steelers always win those games, but they win them at a pretty decent clip, right up there with other really good teams. So I don't think that's a big thing. But there's certainly the concern that this week could be a week where you stumble after such a hot start. And I get the anxiety. I get the feeling, because this is also a place that has been rough for the Steelers to win it. They haven't won in Cleveland, Ray, since 2021, the last time Ben Roethlisberger played in Cleveland. So They're looking to get their first win there. Russell Wilson talked about how hard it is to win there, even though he, did so in another uniform. Cam Hayward talked about it yesterday. There's a lot about this Browns game and this Browns stadium about how they're going to have to be prepared going into this week. And the way I'm hearing these guys talk about it, it doesn't seem like they're overlooking this team or this opportunity they have in front of them.
No, and maybe that 1-4-1 record in Cleveland in their past 6 games there has something to do with that. I mean, it's fresh in their minds that they haven't had a lot of success there. I don't know. For me, Chris, when I think about trap games, short week, division rival on the road, I mean, I don't know. Is it really a trap game if they lose? I mean, those are some tough circumstances. But listen, the Steelers did have a problem last year. They lost to a 2-win Patriots team. They lost to a 2-win Arizona team. And when you look at the end, the end game in that ended up costing them dearly in the seeding. So this is a game the Steelers should win. And if they actually want to be a contender for a top seed in the AFC, win the division, this is a game they have to win.
I agree. It's a game that they need to win. It's a game that they need to pull out. And if you get to 9-2, 3-0 through the gauntlet of the second half of the season that everyone said was going to be so impossible, I think that paints a lot of easier pictures for you down the stretch here, where if you're the Steelers, you're looking at and saying, hey, it might only take about 4 more wins to lock up the division there, especially if one of those last wins is the second matchup with the Ravens. But I look at the Steelers and how they're handling the situation. They're not overlooking the Browns. They know exactly who the Browns are. They're working on that. They're trying. I mean, heck, all the meetings they've been in just the first 2 days of the week that we were at the facility, they are well attended. And Mike Tomlin said he didn't even look at the Ravens film. He just went right into the Browns tape, and they're looking for advantages there. I think this, like you said, this is a divisional opponent. It's a team that they don't like. It's a place where they haven't won recently, and this is also a very important part of the end. This team is, if anything, this team has been mature. This team has been able to understand the moments that they've been in and responded well to those moments. I think that this, when I think of a trap game, I think of a team like the Patriots, the Cardinals, where you have no reason to think to expect them to really step up in the game. They're not a divisional opponent. They're not a team that gets up just to play you. And that's why I don't think this is a trap game. But this is still a game that they could lose if they're not on their P's and Q's, because the Browns do have decent talent on their roster.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that game against the Saints, it ended 35-14, but it was 14-14 in the entering the fourth quarter. The Saints scored 21 unanswered points to win that game. And unfortunately for the Browns, that's kind of been the story of their season. They eventually games get away from them. I think 4 of their 8 losses, Chris, have been by 15 points or more. So they're not doing what they have to do to be in these games, in the second half, and especially in the fourth quarter. So this is going to be a tough one. Do not be surprised if it's a close game at halftime or even in the third quarter. The Steelers are going to have to make some plays to pull out this game on the road.
They certainly are. Right now, the Steelers are 3.5-point favorites over the Browns. They started at 4.5 in the top of the week. They've dropped down a point since then. Ray, normally we'd save the predictions for the Friday show because it's usually a Sunday game. But let's do some predictions here for the Steelers game against the Browns. What's your final score prediction, and what do you think is the biggest factor that gets you there?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it last segment. I think it's going to be defending that Browns running game and shutting them down and making them one-dimensional. So I'm going to say Steelers win this game. I'm going to say another low-scoring game, two familiar opponents. I'll say Steelers 19, Cleveland 13.
19-13, another nice, weird, odd score that no one's gonna really know what to do with when they get to it. I like that. I like that around that range. I'm going more like 24-10. I think the Steelers finished some drives a little bit better in this game. Part of it is I look at this Browns defense and I haven't been as impressed as I have been in recent years. And one thing I asked Russell Wilson was like, look, this defense likes to be aggressive. And he went right to Jim Schwartz. He's like, yep, that's Jim Schwartz's defense. He likes to bring it. He likes to blitz. He likes to press. But this Browns team has had a lot to deal with this year. They haven't been as consistent. And to me, when I look at that and I see this Steelers offense and what they've done recently, there's going to be opportunities for big plays in this game for the Steelers offense. Not that they're going to make them all the time. They're just going to be walking down the field all the time. But I think that there are spaces in this Browns defense where you can attack the seams. You can run the football. You can neutralize Myles Garrett. And let your offense dictate the pace of play. And if the Steelers do that, I like their chances. We both have the Steelers winning. I think you said, what, 19-13 was your score?
Yep.
And I got 24-10. So not two high scoring affairs, but definitely physical football that's going to have the tone set. We will have our sports reporters on hand at First Energy Stadium. That is what it's still called, right? I think. But in the Browns Stadium in Cleveland, covering there. I'll be on the road covering the Greenbrier tournament, but we will have all our coverage available to you at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Ray, thanks so much for joining us. And thank you all for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you enjoyed this show on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube, like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Stay tuned for the rest of the week, getting you locked in for Thursday Night Football, and from our guys who will be at the stadium Thursday night covering the game. We'll see you here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.